Okay, I think we're having people join us, so welcome. This is Australia at Home and Organising for Young Workers. So we'll give people a little bit of time to get online and then we'll do some openings and some acknowledgement. But I can see Juan, I can see Maureen. Welcome, Maureen. Give us a wave. I can see more people online. I can see a Peter and a Jeff and a Gloria. Claire, yeah, give us a wave, Claire. Unions WA, hello Unions WA. Carol S, that might be Carol Saunders. Hello Carol. Dominic and Amanda, Michelle, Jan, we're having quite a few come online, so welcome everybody. Could I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, wherever you are dialing in from. I'm here from Melbourne, so the land of Wurundjeri people of the mighty Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and any Aboriginal people that might be joining us today. This land was stolen, never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And in light of our discussions about Black Lives Matter and the injustices that we've seen not only in Australia, and the current discussions about denial of slavery and Aboriginal rights, we stand in solidarity with all Aboriginal people and all Black people who are currently in a massive struggle, and we stand with you. Well, I'm very pleased that you've all dialed in today on what in Melbourne is a pretty cold, typical Melbourne morning, or afternoon now, and I want to do a couple of thank yous from the top. Can we thank EMC and Peter Lewis for getting this going? I also want to thank the team from Australian Progress, Kirsty Albion. My name's Hilakari, I'm the Secretary of Trades Hall Victoria. Trades Hall Victoria is the oldest union building in the world, something we're immensely proud of. We're the first place in the world to win the 8-hour day. But we're not here to do a history lesson, even though we could do the whole hour just on union membership and what achievements the working class have won. Today we're actually here to talk about organising young workers amidst COVID-19. I want to introduce Felicity Sowerbutts, first of all, the Director of the Young Workers Centre. Hello, Felicity.
Hi, Luke. Looking forward to this discussion this afternoon.
Do you want to tell everyone what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, like Luke said, I head up the Young Workers Centre. The Young Workers Centre was launched in February of 2016. So, coming up for 5 years old now. We're based out of Trades Hall and really are a one-stop shop for young workers who want to learn more about their rights at work or who need assistance in resolving workplace issues. We know that prior to COVID-19, so many young workers were unfortunately being ripped off at work, working in unsafe workplaces and experiencing things like bullying and harassment. These were all issues before this pandemic, and yeah, we've continued obviously to see them in the last couple of months, and often in a heightened sense as well. So yeah, we exist to support workers aged 30 and under in Victoria to come together as a collective and deal with those issues that they face at work.
Yeah, it's super important. So Felicity's team is one team here at Trades Hall, the Young Workers Centre. We also have a Migrant Workers Centre who have been doing a lot of work right now, especially about migrant workers who are not entitled to JobKeeper and JobSeeker and who the Prime Minister said should go home. Despite them paying tax here in Australia, despite that we desperately need them to continue to do their work, we very quickly abandoned them. So they do a lot of work in that space. We have a women's team who are fighting for equality and to do better in that space. We also have a women's in construction team, a jobs team, Union Assist. So if you're an injured worker and you're in Victoria and you need help with work cover, you come to us. We also have Megaphone, which is a petition platform. Think about change.org, but from a worker's perspective. We have a Just Transitions team and a team that takes care of occupational health and safety. So that's broadly Trades Hall. We're made up of about 40 different affiliates, but collectively we're trying to make a really big difference. Today joining us as well will be a couple of young workers, Lil and Matt. Lil is a DIMIX worker. She works at, or still works out at Chadstone, and Matt works for Young Engineers in South Melbourne. We might just say, I'm going to say, bring in Lil first. Lil, do you want to say hi?
Hello, hi.
Wait, you did that perfectly well. Do you want to say anything about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Lil. I've been working at DIMIX for almost 4 years now. Been having quite a bit of trouble at the workplace, and so reached out to the Young Workers Centre, and I think I'm just here to share about how that experience is so beneficial, and we got really great outcomes that way. Yeah.
I love that, Lil. We're going to hold your story because we're going to bring you a bit later into the program, but I just want to let people know who you are. And Matt?
Hi everyone, I'm Matt. I work for Young Engineers South Melbourne. I've been working for them for about over a year now, and I had a pretty bad experience with my employer trying to get me to sign kind of a dodgy job keeper contract, and so me and co-workers have reached out to Young Workers Centre to get that resolved.
Beautiful, and we're going to hear that story a little bit later in the program too. So welcome, Matt. So Felicity, I've got some questions for you. So young workers, let's set the scene. What is going on for maybe someone who's like getting their very first job in high school, or they've just left university and they're going to embark on their career? What's going on out there in the world?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really tough time for young workers. The impact of COVID-19 on young workers has been huge. I don't think that'll surprise anybody on the line today. We know that young workers have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, but they're also going to continue to be disproportionately impacted for years, if not decades to come as well. It's going to be young workers who are, paying the price of this in the long run. Right now, somebody who's getting their first job before they've left school or they've just graduated, more often than not, they're in insecure work. So they might be a casual worker, and they might be working in an industry like retail or hospitality or the entertainment industry, or increasingly the gig economy as well. And we know that many of these workers in these industries are casual workers. That means that they have bared the brunt, I guess, of those industries which have been hit the hardest by the social distancing restrictions. They were the first ones to close down, and cinemas and cafes are the last ones to reopen as well, at least last ones to open properly. And we know that young workers account for about 46% of short-term casual workers, which is massive compared to the share overall, which is 17.4% of all employment. So yeah, young workers have been hit massively. They're often in insecure and casualised work, and that means it'll be harder for them to get back into work as well, and I guess not be underemployed. Underemployment was a big issue prior to the pandemic, and will continue to be so as well. So we're pretty worried about youth unemployment rates. They could hit anything like 30%, and they're currently at 13.8%, but I think in real terms are probably even higher than that, to be honest. And ultimately it'll take young workers, sadly, I guess, longer to catch up or get back to where they would have been otherwise, had we not had this pandemic.
So what I'm hearing from you is that life was already difficult before the pandemic came along. So most young workers are in some type of casual or insecure work, and that means that they might not have regular hours. They might not know what their shifts are going to be week in, week out. And often it means they're being underpaid. So if we look like an industry like hospitality, we know that 1 in 2 workers is going to be underpaid if you're in that industry at all. Doesn't matter if you're 100 years old or if you're 18 years old, you're going to be underpaid. That's a huge issue that we think is a business model that's being adopted by a lot of countries, a lot of companies, and it's wage theft. And if you had to think of one person off your top of your head that symbolised that, Felicity, give me a name of a chef.
I reckon Columbaris comes straight to mind. That's one that rolls off the end of the tongue because we've had to talk about him so much.
So George Columbaris typified that. So he built his multi-million-dollar empire off the back of people being underpaid. And it looks like a whole lot of different things. Some people working extra hours and not being paid for that. Some people were just being paid less than the award. Some people weren't being paid their superannuation. So this can often happen in a whole lot of hospitality and retail, but a whole lot of other workplaces too, which is why in Victoria we've been campaigning for Australia's first wage theft laws, which is a big deal, and it's in the Parliament this week. So what can you tell me about that, Felicity?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, wage theft is obviously a massive issue, and I guess one of the reasons why the Young Workers Centre was set up, and something that we've been campaigning around and organising around for years now. We're very excited to see that it'll be in the upper house of the Victorian Parliament this week. And yeah, hopefully it will make a massive difference to so many young workers. It'll mean that bosses can go to jail for up to 10 years if they are deliberately underpaying workers and should have known better. So this is a big, hopefully we'll get it through Parliament, and when we do, and if we do, it'll be a massive win for all those young workers who have shared their story, and those that have campaigned and been on the streets talking about this and making it an issue on the public agenda for so many years now. And I guess with COVID-19 as well, wage theft has certainly not stopped. It's in fact continued in a new form as well. We've seen had so many young workers reach out to us and talk about how their boss is trying to, I guess, keep some of the JobKeeper payment for themselves, and that is wage theft in another form. And I guess Matt will probably talk to that a little bit later on. But we're seeing wage theft in a different form, and yeah, it's not on, and it's not fair. That it's another reason why young workers are bearing the brunt.
Yeah, so I might get to the COVID stuff just a little bit later in the piece, but I think what we should note is there's a lot of people who are online now who really helped in that campaign, and we just want to give you a big thanks. Like, we're not there yet. The bill is still to pass the House, but when it does, it'll make a substantial difference. So for a corporation who would otherwise not get a fine, the fine will be up to $1 million, and for an individual is up for $200,000, which will make a big difference. We've been faced in sort of an environment where the Fair Work Ombudsman was the cop on the beat, but that cop on the beat really had been sleeping by the donut shop and doing not much more than eating the donuts, because they had 14,000 people who did a report into that organisation that they had their wages stolen, and yet only 40 of them were prosecuted. 40 out of 14,000, which sort of said to the industry you could get away with it. So I'm very pleased that legislation is coming forward. It's going to make a huge difference. Now, on top of what's happened, Felicity started talking about what's happened now with the pandemic. And what we've seen is similar organisations that were willing to take money from people before the pandemic, even though the pandemic makes everything so much more harder, was willing to take the JobKeeper allowance. So do you want to talk us through, Felicity, what the JobKeeper allowance is first?
Yeah, sure. So the JobKeeper wage subsidy is a flat rate of $1,500 a fortnight. It's designed to help workers through this health crisis, but ultimately keep workers connected to their employers and their workplaces as well, so that once we're through this, that businesses can get up and running quickly, workers can get back into work quickly, and they don't have to go through a recruitment process or a training. They can just get back to work as soon as possible. So it's designed in that way, and is ultimately a payment to help workers put food on the table and pay their bills throughout this period of time.
Now I'm going to flash people back in time like 2 months. And what we saw 2 months ago was that Scott Morrison said he was not going to introduce a JobKeeper type payment. So unlike where countries sort of led, Boris Johnson was one of the first people to come out and offer that payment. He wasn't going to do it. And it took a combination, funny enough, of an unholy alliance, if you would, between workers and businesses, and Victoria, that was led by the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and the Victorian Trades Hall Council, to go to the Prime Minister and say, look, enough's enough. If workers do not receive money during this time, this whole country is going to collapse. And so that pushed the momentum to get the Prime Minister over the line. And it wasn't the perfect system, and we're in a pandemic, so you got to cut some people some slack for that. But there were some people who missed out on it. So Felicity, who missed out on the JobKeeper payments?
Yeah, so the government excluded casual workers who have been at their place of employment for less than 12 months, and they also excluded temporary migrant workers. So about 1.1 million casuals, were excluded due to the 12-month kind of timeline, and then another 1 million temporary migrant workers as well. So over 2 million people initially who were excluded from the get-go, and then we've had a whole heap of instances as well where employers are saying that a casual isn't regular and systematic as well, and trying their best to exclude others. So there's a whole heap of workers who have been excluded. So many of those are young workers, and we mentioned before about being in insecure and casualised work. In retail and hospitality, the turnover each year is 60%. that means that, you know, the vast majority of people in those two industries, which again are the ones that have been hit the hardest, are not eligible for this JobKeeper payment. These are also workers that don't have, you know, a massive paycheck each week. They are often on low wages already. They're the ones that, you know, struggle to get through paycheck to paycheck, and are really the ones that need this JobKeeper payment, you know, more than anyone. So, and that was a real shame to see those people excluded from the get-go.
So what happened to those people? So they weren't receiving an income. What do they do?
Well, I mean, for temporary you know, migrant workers, visa holders, that's a really tough situation that they were put in. They can't go to Centrelink, they can't get job seeker, and, you know, they need to rely on charities or family or friends if they've got them nearby who can help them out. But, you know, we're now months deep into this, and that's a really tricky situation for so many of those people to be in, those casuals to be in. But ultimately, yeah, they're in a really tricky spot.
And I think it was a real trap, because many of these migrant workers, they couldn't actually get home, right? Like, the borders had closed, the airlines had stopped taking off and sending people back there anyway. And so they came to this country. Now they can't leave this country. They can't earn a wage because the business is now in hibernation, and they can't get any money from the government. So it's a very difficult situation. For other workers, casual workers, they're in a similar situation, except that they could then maybe transfer from a JobKeeper to a job seeker allowance, which provided, you know, $200 less approximately a week, but, you know, it was still an income. But we want to do better than that. And so that's why we've been started campaigning. Now, we've seen some loopholes with JobKeeper. What are those, Felicity?
Yeah, so we actually set up a website called jobscammer.com.au because we were starting to hear stories of where bosses were taking advantage of the JobKeeper wage subsidy. So we launched that website probably 2 months ago now, and it was a place for workers to, I guess, job in their boss, share their stories about how JobKeeper wasn't being rolled out correctly in their workplace. We've had over 500 workers across the country share their stories there, of which 60% of them are young workers. They've been telling us things like their bosses are failing to opt them into JobKeeper in the first instance. Bosses are claiming they're not regular and systematic casuals, and we've heard of employers making their workers who are on JobKeeper work, I guess, way more hours than they would ordinarily to kind of match or to earn JobKeeper. And also, yeah, like we mentioned before, employers trying to force their workers to sign these dodgy JobKeeper contracts to undermine the wage subsidy.
Now, I don't think we should just let the employers get away with just being known as an employer. So why don't we name a couple of them? Because some of them are household names that have put themselves in a position where they're happy to exploit workers. So give me your 3 terrible offenders. Top 3.
Well, we've had a few of these on our Facebook page. We've had stories from a worker at My Chemist in regional Victoria, Affinity Education, which is a large childcare provider. Those are 2 which come to mind. And then obviously we've got Lil and Matt here as well, who definitely have their own stories to tell a little bit later on.
Yep. All right. Well, we've seen a number of companies exploit workers. Everything from people who like to make juice that might give you a bit of a boost, would be a good way of putting it. I don't know if people can work out who they are, to like car companies, restaurants. It's unbelievable. Yeah. 500 people coming forward, and it's a brave thing to come forward to say what's going on in this nation. So there's obvious holes.
I might just jump in and quickly talk about General Pants as well, which is another really big one. Some of you might have seen the 7:30 report, not the Thursday, just gone the Thursday before that, where a worker called Wendy spoke out about her experience at General Pants, where she's not being put onto JobKeeper because they're claiming she's not regular and systematic. She's been at General Pants for almost 5 years now. She is one of many General Pants workers that we're in touch with and meeting, and they're running a strong campaign. They've got a petition going at the moment to get General Pants to review decision, because this is something that's affecting hundreds of casual workers at General Pants across that brand.
Yeah. Now, it might sound like this is the doom and gloom show, right? So we want to avoid the doom and gloom show for a minute. And why don't we talk about some good stories of organising? So Felicity, tell me about some of the wins. How we did it.
Well, ultimately, one good thing, about COVID-19 is that young workers have been able to come together quickly and easily online. So just like we're doing now on Zoom, COVID-19 has presented opportunities for young workers to speak to each other more, engage with each other more, and take action quicker than ever before. So we brought young workers together to campaign on JobKeeper, to get JobKeeper in the first place and now hold bosses to account. We've run...
Hey, Felicity, why don't I hold you there for that minute? Because I think you might have underplayed a moment. So I want you to talk about, just for a tick, the online picket line. Online picket line, right? World first.
So we have an online picket line now, 3 months ago, which was a 10-hour Facebook Live, basically TV show from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m, which had different segments on it and different guest speakers. We took action every hour, a different form of action around JobKeeper. So things from tweeting to call-in talkback radio to call-in MPs, and the whole shebang. It was a whole day of action, and we were able to bring together thousands of people throughout those 10 hours to take action in a way that we'd never done before and they'd never done before. So it was super exciting, and collective action in action.
So it turns out, with little notice, you can do not the best quality TV you've ever seen in your life. I'll tell you that. It wasn't all compelling all day, but what it was able to do is to bring thousands of people to take action in one moment, when it's very difficult in the height of the pandemic to physically go to march on a parliament or stand in front of an office, like when we're in the full height of what was going on. So that was a special moment. There's some learnings about what organisations with a bit of gumption and are happy to be embarrassed themselves a little bit, always willing to pull folks together. So we did that. Do you want to continue on with our actions?
Yeah, we've held Zoom meetings as well, where we've basically run a phone bank over Zoom, where we go into breakout rooms, we put ourselves on mute so we can see each other having conversations and call in members of the public or members of Parliament. But it means that being in a breakout room, we're able to troubleshoot and give feedback on like conversations that we've had, debrief, and all those things which you would normally do when you're in person at a phone bank, we've been able to replicate as best we can online too. And we've even held social evenings online. So we used the Netflix party app to host a viewing of Pride. And one Tuesday evening, young workers came together. And that was a really nice moment in the midst of all this campaigning around JobKeeper, to take a moment just to kind of refuel ourselves as well.
Don't spoil the movie for everyone, but what's the highlight of the movie Pride?
Oh, the music's pretty good, to be honest.
Well, it's not a musical.
I know, but it's still got some good music in there.
It does. All right. E-learning. Talk to us about how we can teach people.
Yeah, so part of our work at the Young Workers Centre is to go into schools across Victoria and speak with young people as they're about to get their first job about their rights at work. This means that over time they'll be empowered, they'll know their basic rights at work, and be in a better position. We've heard so many stories, and we've already told this this afternoon about young workers getting ripped off at work. So we want to kind of nip that in the bud and make sure people are getting their first jobs, knowing their rights at work. We obviously can't go and haven't been able to go into schools over the last few months. So we've launched 3 e-learning modules, which students have been participating in from home. Over 300 Victorians to date have participated in those e-learning modules. And I guess just talks to the fact that whilst our world looks a little bit different now, it's really important that we have continued with some of this core work that we have been doing for years now anyway. We couldn't put it to one side. It was really important that we kept it up throughout this period of time too.
And what about working to do like group meetings online?
Yeah.
Workplace meetings.
Yeah, so I think we'll get Lil and Matt involved in the conversation in a second, but what we have been able to do off the back of jobscammer.com.au and young workers reaching out to the Young Workers Centre is we've been able to quickly and easily get workers on Zoom together to talk about next steps and how they're going to take action. This is actually something that we had never done before. We had always, tried to get people together face to face. That obviously takes time. People are traveling, from various places to meet. It is harder, it slows the process down. And it means that by coming onto Zoom as a collective and as getting a few different workers together, we can get to work quickly and we can take action quickly whilst the issue is really hot, rather than waiting like a week to be able to get everyone in the room. And it means we can take action immediately. And it's also meant as well that not necessarily in the case of like Lil and Matt, but with the general pants workers at the moment, we're able to connect workers from various stores together. And again, that would be harder to do face to face with everyone working different shifts and so on as well, and working at stores across suburban Melbourne and even regional Victoria. So this has been a really good way of bringing young workers together to take action straight away.
Yeah, I think we're learning some new and important tricks about how you organise across geographic distances like we have in Australia in a really efficient way. So we've been pumping you guys up all day, Lil and Matt. You guys are the celebrities that are coming to everybody's households right now. So I want to bring you on. Now, there's been more people that joined, so we're going to reintroduce you. So Lil, we're going to go to you first. Do you want to introduce yourself, who you are, where you work?
I'm Lil. I work at Dimmicks in Chadstone and have done so for about 4 years. And we had a few issues with our boss and JobKeeper, reached out to the Young Workers Centre and got a really, really great result off that.
Great. Matt, bring it, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt. I work for Young Engineers South Melbourne. I've been working there for over a year now. And I had a lot of trouble with getting JobKeeper and a pretty dodgy contract that my boss tried to get me to sign. And so I contacted Young Workers Centre to get that solved. And we basically had a really good outcome out of that as well.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to go back to Lil. Lil, do you want to take us through your story? So what happened when the pandemic hit, first of all?
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit at Chadstone, there was actually a case sort of towards the latter part of March at Kmart, so a couple shops down from where we were. Our manager was really kind of warm towards us and said that if we had any concerns about coming to work, knowing that there was a case just around the corner, that we would be able to take time off and that wouldn't affect our employment, and that he would be happy to have us back whenever we wanted to come back. So a lot of us took him up on that offer. Took about 2 weeks off and said at the end of this 2 weeks, we'll come back to work, roster us on, we're ready. That was all good. 2 weeks ended, we didn't hear anything from work and we're all kind of a bit confused, reached out to work, and then we were basically told after a lot of badgering them that we'd all been made unemployed and that we were no longer employed by Dimmicks Chadstone and that we should all go and apply for Job Seeker instead, even though none of us are actually eligible for that either. So yeah, that's what.
So how were you told this like pretty horrible news?
Yeah, well, we initially weren't. They just sort of told us that they were going to nominate us to JobKeeper until it was the day before the forms were supposed to go in. We'd called our manager, called the regional manager and just said, like, where are the forms? We haven't seen them. Sent a lot of emails out to everyone, and we were basically... we had an email from the owner of the store to the regional manager leaked to us, so it wasn't even sent directly to us, in which it like detailed that they no longer considered us employed. But we actually weren't formally told of that until about 2 weeks after we'd seen the leaked email.
And how'd that make you feel as a group?
I think we were all quite angry and kind of betrayed by that, because we've been at Dimmicks since we were like 15 years old. Many of us now are in our 20s, and so we feel like we'd given been really, really like good workers and really loved what we did, and then to sort of be dumped pretty unceremoniously like that was a rough one to take.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. I'm going to come back to you in a minute when you start to take action, but we'll just flick to Matt a bit and ask him the same questions. So the pandemic hit you guys, Matt. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your job is and what you did?
Yeah.
Like what you did and then what happened next?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So Young Engineers South Melbourne is kind of like an after school kind of teaching program thing for primary school kids that teaches physics and robotics and coding using Lego. And so basically my role was I would run after school lessons for primary school to, so from prep to year 6 kids, and we would use Lego to teach like physics, engineering, maths, and robotics.
That sounds awesome. Like,
yeah,
where were you when I was in school? Like, I'm going to go after school and go play Lego with these awesome people. That's great.
Yeah, and it's even better that I get to play Lego for my job. Like, it's awesome telling people that. So yeah, I love my job. But basically, because we're at schools, once COVID hit and all the schools closed, we were all essentially just completely unemployed. And so me and 3 other colleagues reached out to my boss because we knew we were basically the only 4 that had been working there for longer than a year, and said, like, asked, oh, how's JobKeeper? Are we eligible for this? Our boss said that we were, and so we waited for a bit, and then she called each of us individually and said she would sign us up for JobKeeper, but wanted like an arrangement where we would pay her $300 out of our net JobKeeper payment every time we would get the payment, just because she was applying for it. And so I can speak for myself. So personally, like, I questioned her about that, but she kept flipping her reasoning as to why she was doing that. I didn't know a ton about JobKeeper at the time, so I was like, I'm not 100% sure that this was just illegal, which it turned out that it just was. So after that, I got in contact with the 3 other employees, and we kind of all shared our stories, and we were all experiencing similar things. And we were all really uncomfortable with this. And so we came together and tried to reason with our boss, basically saying, we think this is illegal. This is not a good idea for you to do. The tax office does audits. And we came up with alternate ways that we could work from home. So like online lesson plans and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then my boss responded to me by saying that she would just fire me if I didn't sign this like contract that she was going to make for me to do that. And since I really like my job, I just basically said, I don't want to get fired. So whatever I need to do to not get fired, I'll do that.
And let me take you back to that moment a minute. Like, you've worked for this company now for over a year. You seem to me to be like the type of person I want my kids to muck around with playing Lego. You've worked hard, and then your boss says, I'm going to sack you during a pandemic. Like, what did that do to you on the inside?
It was pretty bad. I really enjoy my job, but personally, and this is different for the 3 other employees, I don't have a very good connection with my boss. She's never been really supportive, I thought, in the first place. Like, I suspected she was probably underpaying wages anyway, and there were lots of other dodgy things with our original contract. So it was kind of like half expected that she would do something like this, but this was kind of just, I didn't really understand her reasoning as well, because it didn't seem like she would lose out for just paying us JobKeeper. So it was pretty just baffling, to be honest, but also really.
I'm going to take a guess at that reasoning. And it's a common reasoning that we've seen now from hundreds of companies, and that they just wanted to make more money. Partly, it's the nature of capitalism and greed, but it's a shame that you always see that the pointy end of this tends to be people who are maybe a bit newer to the workforce, where you think things can slide. Now, obviously, you as a group were looking for solutions for her, like you're sort of doing her job at that moment.
Yeah.
But that was, thank you for sharing that, Matt. So we'll go to the solutions in a minute. So I might go to Lil. What did you guys do? So you called the Young Workers Centre, and then what happened?
Yeah, so we actually, 2 of us dobbed in our bosses on the Job Scammer website, and then the Young Worker Centre reached out to us, and we were completely clueless that we had any rights. We were just sort of trying to get a gauge on the situation, but they basically told us that if we stuck together, we'd have a really, really good shot at actually getting nominated to JobKeeper and getting an outcome. And so that was a no-brainer for all of us. We're all really great friends, and so we organised with the Young Workers Centre. We had a number of Zoom calls where we created like action plans and like how we were going to go about agitating for what we wanted done at work, which included putting together a petition that went up, which garnered about, I think it was like 870 signatures by the time it was over, which was fantastic, which basically laid out what we'd gone through at Dimmicks, and we got lots of public support for that, and support from some of our favourite authors, which working in a bookstore was really like validating for us. And
that is really cool, Lil.
really cool.
Like getting the authors whose books are on the shelves to back you in. That's a bit of genius.
Yeah, it was really great to see sort of solidarity coming to the fore like that. And I think as well, just like with the support of the Young Workers Centre, they helped us draft emails and sent emails on our behalf, which, you know, we weren't getting any responses from the bosses, but they got really great and really proactive responses. And so that was really fantastic. They also set us up with media connections, which we wouldn't have had. We didn't even need to utilise them because they were so effective in other ways. But it was really just great to have that sort of support and that organising support. Yeah.
So Felicity, I'm going to bring you back into this conversation. So you get the job, you got the Job Scammer website running, and if people want to go to it, go to jobscammer.com.au and put down your story or share it with your friends if you've got an issue out there. So you get the email that comes in. What do you do with it then?
Yeah, well, the first thing that we do is give someone a call straight away, and we always have a chat on the phone and get a full overview of the situation, so that then we can assess what the next best steps might be. So we'll have that conversation. We'll take a worker through some of the options, but at that point it's all about gathering the info and seeing what they might be willing or capable of doing with their workmates. And then at the Young Workers Centre, we'll have a discussion about what we reckon might be next best steps before we go back to the worker and talk those options through and kind of put the options into action. So exactly, yeah, what happened with Lil, and where our suggestion was, let's get everyone on a Zoom call. And they'd already been trying to talk to their boss and had got nowhere, and so hence why they like what we suggest things, they decide what they want to do, and Lil and her co-workers decided between themselves that the best thing would be to put a petition up, because they thought sending another letter, which they'd already tried to do multiple times, wasn't going to get anywhere, and they were right.
So the Young Workers Centre, when you write into them, there's a group of organisers that work there, but on top of that, there's a really great group of young lawyers, plus volunteer staff who are in their final year of law, who are getting that extra bit of law training. So you'll get some expert advice. But Lil, I'm going to go back to you for a tick. What do you think won that campaign for you? What was the moment that you think you tipped the boss over the line? What did it?
It's probably a really small thing, but actually I think having the Young Workers Centre send emails on our behalf, like with the letterhead. I think before we'd been saying sort of similar things, but we were really easy to dismiss because we're all essentially a bunch of teenagers who have very little capital in this area. But yeah, just the Young Workers Centre, I think sending it being like, these are the points of law which you are wrong on, and you really don't have a choice in this matter, was really what won it for us and what got us over the line.
Yeah, and I reckon none of that would have happened, Lil, without your efforts and the rest of your team members sticking together. Like that's simply what a union is: a group of workers who come together to make change. So congratulations on your win. We'll come back to you in a tick. I want to go to Matt. So Matt, the boss has basically gone to you. You're going to lose your job. Tell me what happened from that point onwards. What organising work did you do?
So I initially reached out to a lot of people that weren't the Young Workers Centre at the time, because I hadn't heard about them yet. So I reached out to the ATO and Fair Work and a free legal service provided by my university. And then it didn't really seem to be able to give really good advice or anything that could create action at the moment. It was actually one of my co-workers who reached out to Young Workers Centre. And then we basically immediately jumped into a Zoom call with Shauna from Young Workers Centre. And basically came to the idea of creating a group email similar to Lil, I think, and sending a joint letter to my boss, basically asking that we just get paid JobKeeper in full, and that none of this contract that was sent to me is void. It's illegal for many reasons anyway. It had a lot of stuff about guaranteeing work for casuals, which is kind of an oxymoron, and also this is payment for future wages and stuff like that. So there was a lot more that was really dodgy about it. So we did that, sent a joint letter. We also contacted the head of the franchise in Sydney. So Young Engineers is a franchise, and one of their heads was in Sydney. So we contacted him and kind of dobbed our boss into him, and he's kind of oversees a lot of the Australian franchises. So he was kind of like on our back, like by our side for that, and got in contact with our boss as well. And then after a bit of a back and forth, our boss tried to have us have individual meetings. So there were 4 of us, each of us have our own individual meeting discussing like terms of redundancy was what they emailed us about. And then we pushed back on that saying, no, we all have the same role. If it's about redundancy, we should all be in the meeting together, and we want to have a joint meeting. And then they basically agreed to that. And then in that meeting, we discussed new working arrangements that we can do from home online, and that they would pay us JobKeeper in full for like an 8-week period. So yeah, that was pretty good. Basically what happened, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great outcome. It's interesting how often employers like to individually tackle you. Tackling you as a group, it shows how the power instantly shifts. So Matt, so you've won the day. What have your co-workers done to celebrate?
It's actually kind of an interesting situation. So 2 of my co-workers, well, one co-worker is in the same boat as me, is that she's doing stuff online, kind of lesson planning, same as me, and getting paid JobKeeper. One of them managed to jump ship because she had another job somewhere else where she was also eligible for JobKeeper, and they weren't going to mess around with her. So she's just like, I'm not going to bother with JobKeeper from here. I'm going to do it there. And another one, I've actually tried to reach out to a few times, and he was really reluctant to take any action because he was really worried about his job security. And I actually don't know what has happened to him. And my boss, when I asked my boss, are you paying all of us JobKeeper? She's like, I can't tell you that. It's not within your right to know what I pay other people. And so we haven't really had a good chance to celebrate, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That initial action of threatening people's employment has almost broken trust in that workplace. And people are going, well, if I've got other options, I'm going to start looking. Thanks for sharing all that stories, Matt. Lil, have your workmates had a chance to like do a bit of hurrah?
Yeah.
That's how people celebrate, right?
Yeah, I wish we could do something super fun. Ever since we got put back on JobKeeper, we're almost all working together every day. So really getting their money's worth there. But that's good because at work, I'm back every day with my friends. And so it's kind of all that, yeah, we really wanted. But it's been good.
Lil, thanks for sharing your story. It's awesome to hear from both of you and Matt about what collective action can really make a change, and letting everyone online know about that too. I think it's a big deal. I'm going to go to Felicity. Now I will give a warning that I failed to pack a power cord, and it says it's got 9% charge. So like, let's hope that 9% goes the distance. But if not, you've got Felicity. But Felicity, we should do some Q&As and ask people from the audience.
Yeah.
Do you have questions for Lil and Matt? Maybe you can facilitate this one, Felicity.
Yeah, so we've had some questions come through already. So we've got one here from Peter Lewis. I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute and ask it, Peter, or I can also, I can ask it out loud if you're...
Yeah,
I'll bring
it. There you go, you're off mute.
Hi guys, and thanks for being part of Australia at Home today and a great discussion. You know, Luke and I have spoken over the years about the real challenge of getting young people to understand what unions are before it's almost too late, and the sense that it's not a natural thing to do to join a union when you enter the workforce. So I was particularly interested in both our young speakers on what they knew about unions before they had this experience, and how you now talk to your friends about unions, and you know what your sell to your friends are.
I can go first if that's okay. Yeah. I had very little understanding of, I knew what a union was, but I didn't understand what it could do for someone in my position, like a young worker, because it seemed like it was something for making big changes within an industry, like sweeping hourly changes across the whole industry and stuff like that. I didn't realize the extent that it could help people in my position as well. But also the fact that I'm in university, still kind of not 100% sure my career path. I'm basically thinking stay in academia, go into industry, and there's different unions depending on which path you take. So the idea of joining a union now didn't seem like it would be something useful at the moment, because I don't even know what industry I'm going to be going into yet. It's kind of still forming. So that was my experience with it.
Yeah, I sort of was coming at it from a different place. I come from a family that's really heavily involved in the union movement. So I was like, when I first started at DMX, my parents helped me join a union, but I was for the entire time up until this at DMX the only unionized staff member, and that sort of I think there was quite a negative perception of unions and of the fact that I was unionized. So I actually caved and I let my union membership lapse sort of towards the end, which is such a stupid decision. But at the time, yeah, it was just really hard to be the only person in the workplace who's a member of the union, because I just think at the moment there's sort of this emphasis that like things really aren't that bad in the workplace, that unionizing is sort of redundant, which I think our experiences now just go to show that that's not really the case. And since this, my whole group of friends and co-workers have all unionized, joined the union.
Wonderful. I might just see if we've got any more questions on Lil and Matt's experience. And then we've also got some from a bit, which kind of talks to what myself and Luke were talking about earlier on about going into schools and that sort of discussion. So I might just give us a couple of seconds to see if there's anybody who's got a question about both Lil and Matt's experience and jobscammer.com.au. Doesn't look like we do. Oh, we have one. Hiba has got one who we know well at Trades Hall. Hiba has asked a question of Lil, which is and yeah, even for I guess anybody to respond to it if you've got thoughts. Hiba, do you want to ask your question? Do you want to take yourself off mute?
Sorry, I don't have my camera going at the moment, but yeah, I would thank you for the chats and the really great insights so far. I'd really keen to hear any of the panelists, but especially if you have advice on how to connect with culturally diverse young people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I wish I had some more like probably formulated thoughts on it. But I think in terms of like unionizing and your rights at work and how to connect with culturally diverse young people in that capacity, I think sort of understanding that job precariousness, I guess, they can face along multiple like axes of oppression. So I suppose for me, I was always quite worried because not only was I dealing with the stigma of having to stand up to my boss and be in a union, but I was also dealing with the fact that like as a woman of color, I don't necessarily have the most social capital, particularly because all my bosses are like really wealthy white people. So I think, yeah, just kind of being really understanding of like the intersections upon which like culturally diverse young people are actually trying to have those discussions. And I'm not really sure like how to go about it, but I suppose, yeah, trying to diversify even the ways in which like you connect with them, and just like being more sensitive, I suppose, to the fact that it's often a lot harder because you don't really feel particularly empowered a lot of the time, or feel like you have what you have to say is either important or is going to be listened to.
Thanks so much, Lil. And I think it's, you know, so brave of everybody who's kind of spoken out during this period of time around their experiences around JobKeeper, and yourself included. It's really, I guess, powerful to see, yeah, people taking a stand and willing to do something, doing something about it. Alrighty, and we also had a question, I think, from Ramesh. Would you like to take your self off mute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks, Felicity. Thank you so much. My question was about, I hear a lot of negative perceptions, like Lil was talking about earlier, in the community about unions, union movements, you know, and mostly they're coming from, you know, people who are either, you know, have themselves negative perceptions. So how do you tackle those in your work on your day-to-day?
And I don't know if Lil or Matt or Luke want to speak to that.
Yeah, look, I might start. So there has been some negative perceptions out there, and I'm not surprised by it, because if we look at who has the most to gain by a good news story, well, it's workers collectively organising, and who have the least to gain by workers doing that organising? Well, it's usually people with a lot of power. And those are people who, have a lot of money, and they tend to own a lot of the media. So your Rupert Murdochs of the world are not going to say wonderful things about working people coming together to make change, because it's not in their own financial interest to do so. And when they dominate so much of that space, that's why it's important that we have spaces like we do today to have more honest conversations about what working people can do when they collectively organise. Saying that, if you're in a number of industries, like if you're a nurse, you're going to be part of your union. Like over 90% of nurses are part of the AMF, a great union. If you're in a construction union, you're probably going to be part of the CFMU, because they're going to keep your lives safe at work, and you're going to get a good income from it. If you're part of, the firefighters or the ambulance people, or paramedics, or part of the public service, or if you're a teacher, and God bless the teachers in this time of pandemic, you're going to be part of a union like the AU or the IU. So lots of people will join their professional unions. I think it's a really smart thing to do, because it's the only way in which we can balance the power that the boss has against the great collective. And that's what we've seen with both Lil and Matt, that when workers get together and they put on reasonable demands, that they can make change by taking, not over the top actions in these circumstances, but that was enough to move them. Matt, Lil, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not sort of specifically to the point, but I think I'd just like to say that, we're so grateful for the existence of organisations like the Young Workers Centre, because without their support, I just really don't think we would have had even half the outcome that we've managed to achieve. So yeah, just really appreciative for that.
That's very kind, Lil.
Yeah, I just want to second what Lil said. Totally, I wouldn't have been able to, I don't think, make the action that I had without the Young Workers Centre.
Oh, I love this love fest. More of this. This is fantastic. Was there any final questions that you had, Felicity?
Yeah, we had one from Michelle earlier on, which was about how we can make our, Zoom meetings inclusive of those people and young people in particular with disabilities. I don't know, Michelle, if you're still on the line and want to jump in and ask your question.
I'm going to take that as a no, Felicity.
Maybe we lost Michelle. It was from a little while ago, that question, I'm afraid. But I think I would just quickly say that the good thing about these Zoom meetings is that, it is more accessible to so many other people. I know we had Luke on. I saw before Luke from Yakvik earlier. They've been doing this really good thing, that meetings that I've been a part of, where they've had somebody doing sign language as well on their Zoom calls. And yeah, I think that's been another really good initiative from Yakvik Youth Affairs Council of Victoria, and to making sure that their Zoom calls are also really accessible for young people and people with disabilities more generally. And then we had another Michelle, a different Michelle Fonte, a question about talking to in schools as well. I don't know if Michelle's still on the line.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I was just thinking that, and I've got a son in his late 20s, so I've sort of passed this. But I was just thinking that the idea that young people are even up against employees need probably, or the whole community needs to be stronger on this action. Because if young people don't have a surplus income, they're never going to be able to buy homes and do things and whatever. So I think it's really important that we see it as an investment in the future. So I think in terms of shaming the government and employers, it's about, you'll never get a stronger advocate than parents for their children. So I think if parents knew what to look out for, how to gauge, how to steer their young adults when these things happen to them, because otherwise, as you've seen, that unless they found a young workers place, they wouldn't have known that. So, but parents would, if they knew that existed, would go there, but also start demanding better rights, because I think people think that, oh, it's good that the kid's got a job, but the thing is, it's not good if they get exploited, and we've all got to stand together on these actions, and I think that parents would stand together with young people. And so they should be trained as well as the, so if we're going to the schools, kids are not necessarily going home telling their parents that, but parents from friendship places and all those kind of things, that's where you would get support.
Michelle, you should make a promotional video with us. That's fantastic.
Could I add
we would
something to that?
yeah, Matt.
Just part of my experience. I think your point is a really good one, but the first people that I went to when I was in this situation were my parents. And while they were supportive, I think the idea of having your child go through a really distressing period of trying to fight your boss, as opposed to just kind of accepting the crappy situation that I was in. Both my parents were like, look, it sucks, but this is going to happen and you might just have to deal with it. And from their perspective, that was probably the easier way for them and the more kind way, because it did cause me a lot of stress to go through this, and they just thought it would be easier to just deal with it. So just the thing of I wonder how many parents would be super supportive of that much action. Not to say that it's not a good idea. It's just that was my experience, that they weren't super supportive of taking huge amounts of action or anything like that.
And now at Christmas, what are you going to tell your parents, Matt?
That I'm a union member or something.
And that you were right? And that you were right on this account? We're just about at time, but Matt and Lil, you two are celebrity superstars now. So thank you for being with us today, and your actions is terrific. Felicity, do you have something to add at the end? Not because my mobile capacity is at 1%.
Okay, the pressure's on then. No, I would just say that, we've seen how vulnerable, I guess, our economy is when the work that young people do, like hospitality. And yeah, it's never been more important to make sure that young workers don't get left behind. And that when we talk about a recovery and what post-COVID-19 and what the world looks like post-COVID-19, I think it's really important that young workers' voices are included in that, because like we said at the start, they're the ones that are going to be bearing the brunt of this for years, if not decades to come. And there needs to be a concerted effort in how we're going to get young people back into work, and not just any work, but good, secure, clean jobs. And ones that are going to set them up for a good future. We don't want them to be going back into work where inequality is going through the roof. And this is a chance to rebuild, but rebuild stronger. And I always think if your house, flooded, then you wouldn't rebuild it the same. You rebuild it stronger and better than it was before. And that's the opportunity that we have right now. But we need to make sure that young workers are part of that conversation. So yeah, that's my final parting words. Anything on 0.5% battery left that you want to talk about, Luke?
Yeah, I want to thank Peter Lewis and the team at Australia at Home. You guys do a cracking job. This is a super interesting time for us to have these discussions, and it's just so important. If you've got a chance, go to the Young Workers website. If you're being exploited, go to jobscammer.com.au. Thank you to Lil, thank you to Matt, and everybody, go join your union. Thank you for being with us today.